She took her only daughter to her friend's wedding, only to watch her billionaire ex, the daughter's father, marry the same friend. What happened next will shatter your heart. My dearest, most beautiful family, do you want to see the most breathtaking creation on this earth? Take your phone, open the camera, and look at your smile, because that is a masterpiece even angels envy. Brace yourselves, stay blessed, and prepare your soul. Because what you are about to witness is not just a story. It's a jaw-dropping, heart-wrenching, tear-jerking journey of shocking betrayal, unimaginable sacrifice, and a kind of love so rare it will leave you breathless. Some betrayals arrive not with daggers in the dark, but with gold embossing and the cruel precision of a surgical strike to the heart. Daphne Aldridge commanded her corner office on the 42nd floor of Manhattan's most prestigious business district, like an empress surveying her kingdom. The floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city that had watched her rise from a broken-hearted single mother to the CEO of Aldridge Strategic Solutions, a consulting empire that made Fortune 500 companies tremble with respect. At 32, she possessed the kind of power that most people spent lifetimes chasing, wealth that granted absolute independence, influence that opened any door, and a reputation that preceded her into every boardroom like thunder before lightning. The afternoon sun cast golden light across her mahogany desk, illuminating contracts worth millions and strategic plans that would reshape entire industries. Her assistant had already cleared her schedule for the remainder of the day, knowing better than to interrupt when the Queen required solitude to think. Daphne's world operated with precision, every detail controlled, every variable accounted for, every potential threat neutralized before it could strike, which was why the ivory envelope sitting innocuously among her correspondence felt like a grenade with the pin pulled. Celeste Morrison's name adorned the return address in elegant calligraphy, triggering memories Daphne had spent years burying beneath layers of success and steel. They had been roommates at Columbia, sharing dreams and secrets in their cramped dorm room, building what Daphne had foolishly believed was an unbreakable bond. But that was before she understood that some people collected friendships like reconnaissance missions, gathering intelligence for future campaigns. The invitation itself was a masterpiece of malicious artistry, thick cardstock that probably cost more per sheet than most people earned in a day, gold foil lettering that caught the light like a weapon. Every detail screamed of recently acquired wealth being wielded with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. But it was the names that stopped Daphne's breath entirely. Celeste Morrison and Leif Grosvenor request the honor of your presence. Leif Grosvenor. The name hit her nervous system like an electric shock, triggering a cascade of memories she had spent 5 years learning to suppress. The brilliant, driven entrepreneur who had captured her heart during the most vulnerable period of her life. The man whose arms had been her sanctuary and whose betrayal had nearly destroyed her. The father of her child, who had walked away without ever knowing he was leaving behind a piece of himself. "Mommy, why do you look like you saw a ghost?" The voice belonged to Noelle, who had appeared in the doorway of the office like a miniature angel, her school uniform pristine despite a full day of classes. At 5 years old, she possessed the kind of preternatural intelligence that made adults uncomfortable and the devastating beauty that would someday stop traffic. More importantly, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of a child who had never doubted her place in her mother's universe. Daphne forced her expression into neutral territory, a skill perfected through years of high-stakes negotiations. "Just business correspondence, sweetheart. How was school?" But even as she engaged in the familiar ritual of after-school conversation, her mind was spinning through calculations with the cold precision that had made her legendary in corporate circles. This wasn't coincidence. Celeste hadn't stumbled upon Leif Grosvenor at some charity gala and fallen into accidental love. Every instinct Daphne had developed during her climb to power screamed that this was orchestrated, planned, executed with the kind of methodical patience that marked true predators. She remembered now, with horrifying clarity, Celeste's seemingly innocent questions 2 years ago. The casual inquiries about Noel's father during what Daphne had believed were genuine catch-up calls. The sudden interest in technology conferences and startup culture. The way Celeste had probed for details about Leaf's success. His company's valuation, his personal life, all under the guise of friendly curiosity about Daphne's past. "My baby daddy hit it big, didn't he?" Celeste had said during their last conversation, her tone light but her questions laser-focused. "What's his company worth now? Still single? You should look him up." At the time, Daphne had dismissed it as idle gossip. Now she recognized it for what it had been. Market research. Celeste Morrison, who had graduated with a marketing degree and the moral flexibility of a sociopath, had identified a target, studied his weaknesses, and executed a 3-year campaign to capture a billionaire. She had weaponized their friendship, turned every confidence Daphne had shared into ammunition for her assault on Leif's heart and bank account. The invitation wasn't a gesture of friendship or even a cruel twist of fate. It was a victory lap. Celeste wanted Daphne to witness her triumph, to see the life that could have been hers being claimed by someone who had planned every kiss, every shared moment, every whispered promise with the cold calculation of a military strategist. "The wedding will be held at Rosecliff Estate," Daphne read aloud, recognizing the venue as one of the most exclusive and expensive in the Northeast. No expense spared for Celeste's coronation as the wife of tech royalty. The irony was exquisite. Leif, who had once promised Daphne forever beneath the stars of a rooftop garden, would pledge his future to another woman in a palace built on the foundations of his manipulation. Noelle had settled into the smaller chair beside Daphne's desk. Her homework spread out with the kind of methodical organization that genetics couldn't explain away. She worked with the same intense focus that characterized her biological father, though she had never met the man whose DNA had gifted her with brilliance and an unconscious elegance that made strangers stop to stare. "Will you be working late again tonight?" Noelle asked without looking up from her age-appropriate mathematics worksheet, solving problems that challenged other kindergartners but came naturally to her exceptional mind. "No, sweetheart. Tonight we're going to plan a very special trip," because Daphne Aldridge hadn't built an empire by avoiding difficult battles. She had conquered every challenge through preparation, strategy, and the kind of ruthless determination that had transformed a broken-hearted 27-year-old into a force of nature. If Celeste Morrison wanted to play games with her past, then she would discover exactly what kind of woman Daphne had become in the aftermath of betrayal. The invitation specified Saturday afternoon, 2 weeks away. Enough time to plan, to prepare, to ensure that when she walked into that reception, she would arrive not as a casualty of old wounds, but as the queen she had spent 5 years becoming. Celeste might have stolen Leif through manipulation and calculated seduction, but she was about to learn that some women didn't break when you tried to destroy them. They evolved into something far more dangerous. Daphne reached for her phone, already mentally composing the response that would confirm her attendance. Yes, she would honor Celeste with her presence at this theatrical production. She would bring Noelle, who deserved to see the world that was rightfully hers, by blood if not by acknowledgement. And she would watch Leif Grosvenor pledge his life to a woman who had studied him like a business acquisition. All while his real legacy sat in the audience, unrecognized and unclaimed. "Are you angry, Mommy?" Noelle's voice cut through her planning with the innocent perceptiveness that sometimes made Daphne wonder if her daughter possessed supernatural abilities. "No, sweetheart," Daphne replied, her voice carrying the quiet confidence that had intimidated Fortune 500 CEOs. "Angry queens make mistakes. Strategic queens make enemies pay for their presumption. What would Celeste Morrison say if she knew that her moment of triumph was about to become the opening act for the most devastating lesson in consequences ever delivered? Chapter 2. The Palace Built on Lies. Some castles rise from centuries of honor and tradition, while others are erected overnight on foundations of stolen dreams and calculated betrayal. The morning of Celeste Morrison's wedding dawned with the kind of pristine beauty that money could orchestrate but never truly buy. Rosecliff Estate sprawled across 200 acres of manicured perfection, its Gothic revival architecture commanding the Hudson Valley like a monument to ambition realized. Every detail had been crafted to communicate a single message. The woman marrying Leif Grosvenor today possessed the taste, resources, and social standing worthy of tech royalty. Daphne Aldridge arrived in a charcoal Bentley that whispered power rather than screaming it. The kind of understated luxury that old money recognized and new money envied. She had spent the past 2 weeks preparing for this moment with the methodical precision that had built her empire, treating Celeste's wedding like a corporate takeover that required perfect execution. Every detail of her appearance had been calculated to communicate exactly the right message to exactly the right people. Her dress was a masterpiece of midnight blue silk that had cost more than most people's annual salary, custom designed by a couturier who dressed European royalty and refused to work with anyone lacking sufficient gravitas. The cut was flawless, elegant without being ostentatious, sophisticated without appearing desperate to impress. It was the kind of dress that made other women automatically assess their own choices and find them wanting. Noelle sat beside her in the back seat, transformed into a miniature goddess by an ensemble that matched her mother's in its quiet authority. The 5-year-old possessed a natural grace that couldn't be taught or bought, the kind of innate elegance that marked her as extraordinary to anyone paying attention. Her dark hair had been styled in a way that emphasized the intelligent beauty of her features, and her eyes, those unmistakable eyes, held the curious confidence of a child who had never doubted her place in the world. "It's like a fairy tale castle," Noelle observed as their driver navigated the circular drive toward the main entrance, her voice carrying the matter-of-fact tone she used for everything from mathematical equations to observations about human nature. "Fairy tales often have wolves hiding in beautiful clothing," Daphne replied, her gaze cataloguing every detail of the scene before them. The venue had been transformed into something approaching architectural fantasy, with enough flowers to stock a botanical garden and enough crystal to blind satellites. The excess was breathtaking in its shamelessness, the kind of display that announced its owner's wealth with all the subtlety of a marching band. Guests were arriving in a steady stream of luxury vehicles, each one more expensive than the last. Daphne recognized the carefully curated mix of attendees with the experienced eye of someone who had built her career reading people and situations. Tech industry titans rubbed shoulders with venture capitalists and influential media figures. Old money families mingled with nouveau riche entrepreneurs. Everyone who mattered in the overlapping circles of finance, technology, and social influence had been assembled for Celeste's coronation. "This isn't a wedding," Daphne murmured to herself, watching the theatrical production unfold. "It's a business merger disguised as a love story." The estate's interior had been transformed into something approaching a cathedral, with soaring ceilings draped in enough white fabric to outfit a fleet of sailing ships. Flowers cascaded from every available surface in arrangements that probably cost more than luxury cars. The crystal chandeliers cast rainbow prisms across walls, lined with enough candles to illuminate a small city. Everything glittered, sparkled, and gleamed, with the kind of aggressive beauty that demanded attention, rather than earning it. Daphne moved through the crowd with the fluid grace of a woman who belonged everywhere and owned anywhere she chose to be. Her presence created ripples of recognition as business associates and industry contacts realized that the legendary CEO of Aldridge Strategic Solutions had graced them with her attendance. Conversations paused as she passed, heads turned with the magnetic pull that power exercised over those who recognized it, and whispers followed in her wake like the contrails of a fighter jet. "Daphne Aldridge is here," she heard someone murmur behind her, the tone carrying the mixture of respect and intimidation that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. "I heard she's expanding into the Asian markets next quarter." Her consulting firm just landed the Peterson Group account, another voice added, unaware of the irony embedded in their observation. "She's become untouchable in this industry." Noelle absorbed everything with the quiet intelligence that marked her as her mother's daughter, her gaze cataloguing details that most adults would miss. She understood, with the preternatural awareness that gifted children possessed, that today was important in ways that extended far beyond the pretty dresses and expensive flowers. Her mother had explained that they would be attending the wedding of an old friend, but Noelle sensed undercurrents that her young mind couldn't quite decode. "Why does everyone keep staring at us?" she asked as they found their assigned seats in the front section, her voice pitched low enough that only Daphne could hear. "Because queens are always interesting to observe," Daphne replied, settling into her chair with the kind of regal composure that made expensive clothing look like royal regalia. "People want to see how we carry ourselves, how we respond to different situations, whether we're worthy of the power we've claimed." The seating arrangement had been carefully orchestrated to communicate social hierarchies with military precision. Daphne found herself positioned with clear sightlines to both the altar and the entrance, surrounded by titans of industry and their perfectly groomed spouses. She recognized venture capitalists whose decisions could make or break entire companies, media moguls whose opinions shaped public discourse, and socialites whose approval granted access to circles that money alone couldn't penetrate. "Look at the flower arrangements," Noelle whispered, her mathematical mind automatically calculating quantities and expenses. "There must be thousands of roses in this room." "At least," Daphne agreed, noting the astronomical cost of the botanical displays with the kind of financial acumen that had made her legendary in corporate circles. "Your college education could probably be funded by what's been spent on flowers alone." But beneath the surface appreciation for Celeste's theatrical production, Daphne was conducting a different kind of analysis entirely. She studied the guest list with the strategic mind that had revolutionized corporate consulting, identifying patterns and connections that revealed the true purpose behind this elaborate charade. Every person in attendance represented value to Celeste's campaign for social and financial elevation. Every invitation had been calculated to advance her position in the hierarchies that mattered to someone trying to transform herself from marketing graduate to tech royalty. The musicians began their processional, filling the transformed space with classical melodies that had probably been selected more for their prestige than their emotional resonance. The assembled crowd rose with the synchronized precision of a well-rehearsed performance, turning their attention toward the entrance where the wedding party would soon appear. Daphne remained seated for a moment longer than necessary, a subtle gesture that communicated her independence from the crowd's choreographed responses. When she finally rose, it was with the fluid grace of someone who moved according to her own timeline, rather than others' expectations. Beside her, Noelle mimicked her mother's composure with the unconscious elegance that marked her as extraordinary. "Are you excited to see the bride?" Noelle asked, her question carrying the innocent curiosity that 5-year-olds brought to every new experience. "I'm interested to see how well she's learned to perform," Daphne replied, her voice carrying undertones that her daughter was too young to decode fully. "Today we'll discover whether she's mastered the role she's been rehearsing for 3 years." The processional music swelled with increasing grandeur, building toward the moment when Celeste Morrison would make her grand entrance as the future Mrs. Leaf Grosvenor. The assembled crowd buzzed with anticipation, their energy focused on the theatrical production that was about to unfold. Cameras discreetly positioned throughout the venue would capture every moment for posterity and social media, ensuring that Celeste's triumph would be documented and disseminated to anyone who might have missed the live performance. But Daphne's attention was already focused on what would happen after the ceremony concluded, when the real performance would begin. Because, while Celeste had spent 3 years preparing for this moment of public victory, Daphne had spent the past 2 weeks preparing for the systematic destruction of everything her former friend had built on the foundation of lies and manipulation. "Today we witness the wedding of the century," she murmured to herself, her voice carrying the quiet confidence that had intimidated corporate titans across 3 continents. "Tomorrow we begin writing the divorce of the millennium." Would Celeste Morrison still be smiling if she knew that her moment of triumph was about to become the opening act for her own systematic destruction? Chapter 3. The Puppet Master's Triumph. Some men are conquered by armies, others by women who study their weaknesses with the patience of a chess master planning checkmate 20 moves in advance. The moment Leaf Grosvenor appeared at the altar, every woman in the cathedral-like space felt the visceral impact of masculine perfection, refined by success and polished by wealth. At 35, he possessed the kind of commanding presence that made lesser men automatically defer and caused otherwise intelligent women to temporarily forget their own names. His tuxedo had been tailored by artisans who dressed heads of state, fitting his 6'2" frame with the precision that money demanded and excellence delivered. But Daphne Aldridge saw beyond the surface magnetism to the man beneath, and what she observed made her heart clench with emotions she had spent 5 years learning to suppress. Success had refined Leaf into something approaching masculine perfection, transforming the driven entrepreneur she had once loved into a billionaire whose mere presence commanded rooms full of powerful people. His dark hair now carried the distinguished threads of silver that added gravitas to his already formidable presence. His jawline had acquired the kind of sharp definition that came from the stress of building empires and making decisions that affected thousands of lives. Yet there was something missing in his bearing, some essential quality that success hadn't been able to restore. His eyes, those brilliant blue eyes that had once looked at her like she contained all the answers to questions he hadn't known he was asking, now held a distance that spoke of emotional walls built high enough to withstand any siege. He moved through the ceremony with the mechanical precision of a man performing a role rather than experiencing a moment. His responses automatic rather than heartfelt. When their gazes met across the expanse of white flowers and crystal chandeliers, Daphne felt the collision of 5 years' worth of carefully suppressed emotion. Time collapsed into a single suspended moment where the intervening years dissolved and she was once again the 27-year-old woman who had believed in forever, with a man whose ambition matched her own. She saw recognition explode across his features like lightning illuminating a night sky, followed immediately by confusion, longing, and something that might have been regret. Leaf's composure cracked for exactly 3 seconds, long enough for anyone paying attention to notice that the groom had just been psychologically blindsided by something he hadn't expected. His hand moved unconsciously toward his heart, a gesture Daphne remembered from their early days together when strong emotions overwhelmed his usual control. For a moment, the billionaire CEO disappeared entirely, replaced by the man who had once whispered her name like a prayer in the darkness of their shared apartment. "Mommy," Noelle whispered, her voice carrying the concern that perceptive children felt when the adults around them exhibited unexpected vulnerability. "Why does that man look sad at his own wedding?" The question struck Daphne with the force of revelation, because her daughter had identified something that the hundreds of assembled guests had missed. Beneath the perfect exterior, behind the flawless performance, Leif Grosvenor looked like a man attending his own execution rather than celebrating the happiest day of his life. His smile never quite reached his eyes. His responses to the officiant carried no emotional resonance, and his attention kept drifting back to where Daphne sat with their daughter. "Some people make choices that look perfect from the outside," Daphne replied carefully, her voice pitched for Noelle's ears alone, "but leave them feeling empty on the inside." The processional music reached its crescendo, signaling the bride's imminent arrival, and the assembled crowd rose with choreographed precision. Daphne remained seated for several heartbeats longer than necessary, a subtle gesture of independence that communicated her refusal to participate in Celeste's theatrical production as anything more than an observer. When she finally stood, it was with the fluid grace of someone who moved according to her own timeline, rather than others' expectations. Celeste Morrison appeared at the entrance like a vision conjured from the fever, dreams of every social climber who had ever existed. Her wedding gown was a masterpiece of ostentation disguised as elegance, constructed from enough silk and lace to outfit a royal coronation. The train stretched behind her like a river of white fabric, requiring 3 attendants to manage its choreographed movement down the aisle. Her veil had been crafted from French lace that probably cost more than most people's houses, and the diamonds adorning her throat and wrists caught the light like captured stars. But it was her expression that revealed the true nature of this performance. Beneath the radiant smile that photographers would capture for posterity, Daphne detected the cold satisfaction of a predator claiming her prize after a long and careful hunt. This wasn't the face of a woman overwhelmed by love and joy on her wedding day. This was the expression of a general surveying a conquered battlefield, cataloguing the spoils of a victory years in the planning. The strategic brilliance of Celeste's campaign became increasingly clear as Daphne observed the ceremony's choreographed perfection. Every gesture had been rehearsed, every word calculated for maximum emotional impact, every detail designed to communicate the desired narrative about love conquering all obstacles. This wasn't spontaneous romance. It was performance art executed with the precision of a military operation. As Celeste glided down the aisle with rehearsed perfection, her gaze swept the assembled crowd with the calculating attention of someone taking inventory of her social conquests. She acknowledged titans of industry with subtle nods, offered brilliant smiles to media moguls whose coverage would cement her transformation from nobody to somebody, and generally conducted herself like a queen accepting the homage of her subjects. When her eyes found Daphne, the mask slipped for exactly 1 heartbeat, revealing the vicious triumph beneath the bridal radiance. The look lasted barely a second, but it communicated volumes about the true purpose behind this elaborate production. This invitation hadn't been extended out of nostalgia or misguided friendship. It was a calculated humiliation designed to force Daphne to witness the theft of everything she had lost. "She's very pretty," Noelle observed with the matter-of-fact tone she used for mathematical observations, her young mind processing the visual spectacle without understanding the psychological warfare being conducted in plain sight. "Pretty packaging often conceals ugly contents," Daphne replied, her voice carrying the kind of steel that had made her legendary in corporate boardrooms, where weakness meant annihilation. The ceremony proceeded with the kind of flawless execution that unlimited budgets could purchase. Every word had been carefully chosen, every gesture rehearsed to perfection, every moment choreographed to communicate the desired message about love, commitment, and happily ever after. The officiant delivered his remarks with the polished professionalism of someone accustomed to presiding over weddings where the guest list read like a Forbes rich list directory. But Daphne's attention remained focused on Leif's responses. analyzing each word and gesture with the strategic mind that had revolutionized corporate consulting. His voice carried none of the passionate conviction that had once characterized everything he said about their shared future. His vows sounded like contract negotiations rather than heartfelt promises, delivered with the mechanical precision of someone fulfilling obligations rather than expressing emotions. The contrast between his current performance and the man she had once known was devastating in its clarity. The Leif Grosvenor who had once spoken about their future with such passionate certainty that she believed they could conquer any obstacle together had been replaced by someone who approached even marriage like a business transaction requiring completion rather than celebration. "Do you, Leif, take Celeste to be your lawfully wedded wife?" The officiant intoned, his voice carrying across the transformed space with theatrical grandeur. "I do," Leif replied, but the words emerged flat and lifeless, carrying all the emotional resonance of a quarterly earnings report being delivered to disinterested shareholders rather than a life being pledged to someone claiming to love him. Daphne watched, Celeste's triumphant smile falter slightly at the lack of enthusiasm in her groom's response, saw her grip on the bouquet tighten imperceptibly as she registered the absence of joy in what should have been her moment of ultimate victory. For the first time since the ceremony began, doubt flickered across the bride's features like cracks appearing in a perfect facade. "Do you, Celeste, take Leif to be your lawfully wedded husband?" came the corresponding question, delivered with the same polished professionalism that had characterized the entire proceedings. "I do," Celeste responded with enough enthusiasm for both participants, her voice carrying the victorious satisfaction of someone claiming a prize she had spent years pursuing. But even her radiant performance couldn't disguise the fact that she was essentially marrying herself, celebrating a conquest rather than a union. The kiss that sealed their marriage lasted exactly long enough to satisfy photographic requirements and no longer. Leif's participation was dutiful rather than passionate, his body language suggesting obligation rather than desire. When they turned to face the applauding crowd as husband and wife, his gaze immediately sought Daphne's position in the audience, his expression carrying questions he had no opportunity to voice. "Ladies and gentlemen," the officiant announced with flourishing grandeur, "I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Leif Grosvenor." The applause that erupted from the assembled crowd was thunderous, the kind of enthusiastic response that money and social pressure could orchestrate even when genuine emotion was absent. Cameras flashed with paparazzi intensity, capturing every moment of Celeste's triumph for posterity and social media dissemination. The bride practically glowed with satisfaction as she acknowledged the acclaim, her dreams of social elevation finally realized in the most public way possible. But as the newlyweds processed down the aisle to the soaring strains of triumphant music, Daphne noticed that Leif's attention remained fractured, his gaze returning repeatedly to where she sat with their daughter. Something in his expression suggested that his wedding day was becoming the catalyst for realizations he had spent years avoiding, confrontations with truths he had deliberately buried beneath layers of success and distraction. The irony was exquisite in its cruelty. Celeste had achieved everything she had plotted to obtain, but her victory was hollow because the man she had captured was emotionally unavailable to anyone, including himself. She had won a prize that was already broken, claimed a heart that had been damaged beyond her ability to repair or possess completely. "Are we going to talk to them?" Noelle asked, as the crowd began filing out toward the reception area, her curiosity about the proceedings evident in her careful observation of everything around them. "Eventually," Daphne replied, her voice carrying the quiet confidence that had intimidated Fortune 500 CEOs across 3 continents. "But first, we're going to let them enjoy their moment of triumph." because the sweetest revenge was often allowing people to believe they had won before revealing the true cost of their victory. Chapter 4. The Moment of Reckoning. Truth was a bomb with an unpredictable timer. Sometimes it exploded immediately upon impact. Other times, it ticked away quietly for years before devastating everything within its blast radius. The reception area had been transformed into something approaching a Renaissance palace, with enough gold leaf and crystal to stock a royal treasury. Daphne moved through the crowd with the fluid grace of a woman who belonged everywhere she chose to be, her presence creating ripples of recognition and respect among the assembled titans of industry. Business associates approached with the mixture of deference and ambition that powerful people inspired. Each conversation a carefully choreographed dance of professional networking disguised as social pleasantry. "Daphne, you look absolutely magnificent," gushed Margaret Whitmore, the wife of a tech venture capitalist whose approval could make or break entire companies. "That dress is stunning. Custom." "Naturally," Daphne replied, with the kind of understated confidence that made expensive clothing look like royal regalia. "I find that truly important occasions deserve unique presentations." The compliment carried deeper meaning that Margaret would decode later, when she realized that Daphne Aldridge had just classified this wedding as worthy of her most exclusive attention. In the circles where they traveled, such distinctions mattered enormously, communicating social hierarchies and professional alliances with surgical precision. Noelle remained close to her mother's side, absorbing everything with the quiet intelligence that marked her as extraordinary to anyone paying attention. At 5 years old, she possessed the kind of preternatural awareness that allowed her to navigate complex social situations without fully understanding their underlying dynamics. Her natural grace and unconscious elegance drew admiring glances from adults who recognized quality when they encountered it. "Your daughter is absolutely beautiful," Margaret continued, her tone carrying the genuine warmth that successful women often reserved for exceptional children. "Those eyes are remarkable, so intelligent and expressive." "She inherited her father's eyes," Daphne replied with deliberate casualness, watching as understanding dawned in Margaret's expression. "Because everyone in their industry knew about Leif Grosvenor's distinctive blue eyes, the kind of piercing intelligence that had helped him build a tech empire before his 35th birthday." Across the reception area, Leif Grosvenor stood beside his new wife, accepting congratulations with the mechanical precision of someone fulfilling social obligations rather than celebrating personal joy. His responses were perfectly appropriate, his gratitude appropriately expressed, his performance flawlessly executed. But his attention kept fragmenting, his gaze searching the crowd with increasing desperation, until it inevitably found Daphne and lingered with unmistakable intensity. "He keeps looking over here," Noelle observed with the matter-of-fact tone she used for mathematical calculations, her young mind processing patterns that adults often missed. "Why does the groom keep staring at us instead of talking to his new wife?" The question carried more insight than its speaker realized, because Noelle had identified the central tragedy of this theatrical production. Leif Grosvenor was experiencing the most important day of his life, while simultaneously confronting the possibility that he had made the most catastrophic mistake of his existence. Every glance toward Daphne carried the weight of 5 years' worth of suppressed questions, regrets, and recognitions he had been too proud or too afraid to acknowledge. Sometimes people realize they've chosen the wrong path only after it's too late to turn back, Daphne explained, her voice carrying the kind of wisdom that could only be earned through surviving betrayal and building strength from its ashes. The crowd continued to flow around them like water around stones, each group of guests representing different spheres of influence and professional power. Daphne recognized tech industry leaders whose innovations had revolutionized global commerce, financial titans whose decisions moved markets, and media moguls whose opinions shaped public discourse. Everyone who mattered in the overlapping circles of technology, finance, and social influence had been assembled to witness Celeste's transformation from nobody to somebody. "Mrs. Aldridge," came a familiar voice from behind them, causing Daphne to turn with the kind of controlled grace that made simple movements look like choreographed performances. "What a pleasant surprise to see you here, James Morrison." Celeste's father and owner of Morrison Industries approached with the cautious respect that powerful men reserved for women whose influence could impact their business interests. He was a man who had built a manufacturing empire through strategic ruthlessness, someone who understood the value of maintaining positive relationships with people who possessed Daphne's kind of corporate influence. "James," Daphne replied with the professional warmth that she deployed like a precision instrument, her tone communicating exactly the right level of respect without suggesting subordination. "Congratulations on Celeste's beautiful wedding. You must be very proud." "Indeed," he responded, though his eyes carried the calculating assessment of someone trying to determine why the legendary CEO of Aldridge Strategic Solutions had honored his daughter's wedding with her presence. "Though I must admit I was surprised to see your name on the guest list. Celeste mentioned you were college friends, but that was many years ago." "Old friendships have a way of resurfacing at the most interesting moments," Daphne replied, her words carrying layers of meaning that James would spend hours attempting to decode. "I wouldn't have missed this celebration for anything." The conversation continued with the kind of polished professionalism that characterized all interactions in their rarefied social sphere, each participant carefully managing their words and expressions to communicate precisely the intended message. But beneath the surface civility, Daphne was conducting a different kind of analysis entirely, studying the family dynamics and business relationships that had enabled Celeste's campaign for social elevation. "And this must be your daughter," James continued, his attention shifting to Noelle with the genuine interest that successful older men often displayed toward exceptional children. "She's lovely. What's her name?" "Noelle," came the response in a voice that carried the kind of unconscious confidence that marked children who had been raised by powerful mothers. "I'm 5 years old, and I go to Brookfield Academy." The prestigious private school's name registered immediately in James's expression, communicating exactly the kind of social and economic status that mattered in their circles. Brookfield Academy was where the children of industry titans received their early education, where future leaders were shaped from the most malleable age. The fact that Daphne had secured admission for her daughter spoke volumes about her influence and resources. "Impressive," James replied with genuine respect, recognizing the achievement that such enrollment represented. "That's one of the finest institutions in the country." As their conversation continued, Daphne became increasingly aware of the figure approaching from across the reception area with determined, if unsteady steps. Leif Grosvenor was moving through the crowd with the kind of focused intensity that suggested he had reached the limits of his ability to maintain the wedding performance. His new wife appeared to be engaged in animated conversation with a group of tech industry wives, her attention consumed by the social validation she had spent years pursuing. "Excuse me," Leif said as he reached their group, his voice carrying the kind of strained control that suggested he was operating on the edge of his emotional resources. "James, I hope you don't mind if I steal Mrs. Aldridge for a moment. There are some business matters we need to discuss." The explanation was transparently false. Everyone present knew that urgent business discussions didn't occur at wedding receptions unless someone was attempting to avoid uncomfortable personal conversations. But James Morrison possessed enough social intelligence to recognize when his presence was no longer required. and enough business acumen to avoid inserting himself into situations involving people who controlled his daughter's future happiness. "Of course," James replied with diplomatic grace, gathering his composure and preparing to withdraw. "Mrs. Aldridge, it was a pleasure seeing you again. Perhaps we can continue our conversation another time." As James melted back into the crowd, Daphne found herself facing Leif Grosvenor for the first time in 5 years, their daughter standing between them like a living testament to everything that had been lost and gained in their separation. The moment stretched with the weight of accumulated history, unspoken questions, and recognitions that could no longer be avoided or denied. "Daphne," he said, her name emerging from his lips like a prayer or a curse, his voice carrying 5 years' worth of suppressed emotion compressed into 2 syllables. "I had no idea you would be here. Celeste never mentioned—" "I'm sure she didn't," Daphne replied with the kind of Arctic composure that had intimidated corporate titans across 3 continents. "Your wife has always been selective about the information she chooses to share." His gaze shifted to Noel, and Daphne watched as mathematical certainty destroyed whatever remained of his wedding day composure. The timeline was undeniable, the physical resemblance unmistakable, the implications devastating to everything he had believed about his life and choices. She saw the exact moment when recognition exploded across his features, like lightning illuminating a landscape he had never known existed. "My God," he breathed, his voice barely audible above the reception's ambient noise. "She's your daughter," Daphne finished with surgical precision, her words cutting through 5 years of carefully maintained silence. "Her name is Noelle. She's 5 years old. And she's never asked about her father because I've taught her that some people aren't worth waiting for. But if she knew that the stranger studying her with desperate intensity was about to destroy both their lives in his attempt to reclaim what he had never known he possessed." Chapter 5. The First Wall of Ice. Queens didn't bow to desperation, they crushed it beneath their crowns while teaching harsh lessons about the price of abandonment. The garden fountain provided a backdrop of crystalline music as Leif Grosvenor struggled to process revelations that were reshaping his understanding of everything he thought he knew about his life. His wedding reception continued behind them in a blur of expensive celebration, but his attention was completely focused on the 5-year-old girl who possessed his eyes, his stubborn chin, and an unconscious elegance that genetics couldn't deny. "Please," he said, his voice breaking with the weight of 5 years' worth of suppressed emotion and newfound desperation. "Please, you have to let me explain. I never knew. If I had known about her, I would never have left. I would have stayed. I would have fought for us." Daphne observed his breakdown with the cold detachment of a scientist studying a particularly predictable specimen, her expression revealing nothing of the emotions churning beneath her perfectly controlled surface. She had spent 5 years preparing for this moment without knowing it would ever come, building armor strong enough to withstand any assault on her carefully constructed defenses. "You would have stayed," she repeated, her tone carrying the kind of steel that had made her legendary in corporate boardrooms, where weakness meant annihilation. "How convenient that you've discovered paternal instincts at your wedding reception to another woman. How touching that fatherhood suddenly appeals to you when it comes without any of the responsibility, sacrifice, or sleepless nights." Leif's desperation increased as he registered the absolute zero temperature of her response, the complete absence of the warmth that had once existed between them. He had expected anger, hurt, even rage, emotions he could work with, feelings he could address through apology and explanation. But he had not prepared for this Arctic indifference, this regal dismissal that treated him like an irrelevant stranger rather than the father of her child. "I was manipulated," he continued, his words tumbling over each other in his rush to explain, to justify, to somehow bridge the chasm that 5 years of absence had created. "Celeste kept us apart deliberately, She fed me lies about you moving on, about you not wanting anything to do with me. She made me believe that you were happy without me, that trying to contact you would only cause pain for everyone involved. Poor Leaf, Daphne replied with mock sympathy that cut like surgical instruments, her voice carrying the kind of condescension that reduced grown men to children, so easily manipulated by a woman with a marketing degree and flexible morals, so helpless against basic psychological manipulation that any competent therapist could have identified. What does that say about your judgment, your intelligence, your fitness to be around impressionable children? Noelle remained close to her mother's side, watching the exchange with the quiet intelligence that marked her as exceptional to anyone paying attention. At 5 years old, she couldn't fully understand the complex emotions swirling around her, but she sensed tension that made her unconsciously seek the protection of the only parent she had ever known. "Mommy," she said quietly, her small hand finding Daphne's with the automatic trust that children reserved for their primary source of security. "Why is the man crying at his own wedding?" The question struck Leaf with devastating accuracy, highlighting the absurdity of his situation with the kind of innocent clarity that only children possessed. He was indeed crying at his own wedding, mourning the loss of something he had never known he possessed, while celebrating a union that felt increasingly hollow with each passing moment. Sometimes people make choices that trap them in situations they never wanted, Daphne explained to her daughter, her words clearly intended for Leif's hearing as well. And sometimes they discover too late that the life they thought they were building was actually a prison they constructed for themselves. Leif dropped to his knees in the manicured grass, his expensive tuxedo forgotten as he brought himself to Noelle's eye level, with the desperate hope of making some kind of connection with the daughter he had never known existed. But Daphne moved between them with the swift precision of a lioness protecting her cub, her body language communicating absolute prohibition without the need for words. "Don't," she said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that had silenced boardrooms full of aggressive executives. "Don't you dare try to insert yourself into her life now. You think you can show up at your wedding to another woman and claim parental rights? You think DNA gives you access to a child you abandoned before she was even born?" "I didn't abandon her," Leif protested, his voice raw with emotions he was struggling to control. "I didn't know she existed. How can I be held responsible for something I never knew about?" "Because," Daphne replied with the kind of measured precision that made every word feel like a physical blow, "a real man would have made sure. A real father would have checked. A real partner would have maintained contact long enough to discover the consequences of his actions. You chose the easy path, complete abandonment, rather than the difficult work of maintaining connections." The assault on his character was systematic and devastating, each accusation backed by years of practical experience raising their daughter alone. Daphne had earned the right to moral superiority through every sleepless night, every doctor's appointment, every milestone celebrated without him. Her authority was absolute because it had been purchased with sacrifice he couldn't imagine and responsibilities he had never shouldered. "I can change," he said, the words emerging with the desperation of a drowning man reaching for a life preserver. "I can be the father she deserves. I can provide for her, give her everything she could ever want. I have resources now, influence, the ability to open doors and create opportunities." "She already has everything she needs," Daphne replied with Arctic finality, her tone communicating that the conversation was approaching its conclusion, whether he was ready or not. A mother who has never failed her, a home where she's cherished, an education that will prepare her to conquer whatever world she chooses to enter. What exactly do you think you could add to that equation, except disruption and disappointment? The question hung in the air between them like a challenge issued by a queen to a pretender claiming rights to her throne. Leif had no answer because his desperation was emotional rather than practical, based on what he wanted rather than what Noel actually needed. His paternal awakening was about his own psychological crisis rather than his daughter's well-being. "She's my daughter too," he said finally, the words carrying the hollow ring of legal technicality rather than emotional truth. "I have rights. Courts would recognize my parental claims, especially given my ability to provide financial support." The threat was barely veiled, and it transformed Daphne's expression from Arctic indifference to something approaching nuclear fury. Her voice, when she responded, carried the kind of quiet menace that made corporate executives reconsider hostile takeover attempts. "Try it," she said with such controlled violence that Leif involuntarily stepped backward. "Go ahead and attempt to use the legal system to force your way into our lives. Discover exactly what happens when you threaten a mother who has spent 5 years building the kind of power that makes judges think twice about their decisions. Learn what it costs to wage war against someone who has already survived losing everything and rebuilt an empire from the ashes of betrayal. The promise of systematic destruction hung in the air between them like the threat of nuclear warfare. And Leif realized with dawning horror that he was facing an opponent who possessed both the motivation and resources to annihilate his life if he pushed too hard. Daphne Aldridge wasn't the vulnerable young woman he had left behind. She was a force of nature who had transformed pain into power and now wielded both with surgical precision. "Come, Noel," she said, taking her daughter's hand with the gentle authority that marked exceptional mothers. "We've spent enough time with strangers. Let's go congratulate the bride on her beautiful wedding." As they walked away across the manicured lawn, leaving Leif kneeling in the grass like a broken supplicant, Daphne felt the cold satisfaction of a woman who had just delivered the first lesson in a curriculum designed to teach him exactly what it cost to underestimate a queen's determination to protect her kingdom. But would her walls of ice be strong enough to withstand the systematic campaign of redemption that a desperate billionaire was about to launch against her fortress of solitude? Wait, the story is not over. A beautiful part 2 will be uploaded tomorrow. If you want to watch part 2, like this video, comment, "I want part 2", and subscribe to this channel.